Welcome to Refused Flank, a wargaming podcast exploring the intersection of competitive excellence and narrative storytelling potential.
We are recording.
Okay, we're recording. Hey, this is Grant with Refused Flank.
And this is Cam.
And this week we're going to talk about kind of our impressions of 7th edition Warhammer Fantasy Battle and kind of comparing them to our impressions from 6th edition, mainly because that's our point of reference. That's the game we've played the most. I've owned the 7th edition rulebook for a couple of years now. I've definitely read it. I own actually many of the 7th edition army books. I'm a little bit of a collector, and I've definitely flipped through those more than once, just out of fun and enjoying kind of looking at the game design of it all. So I have some opinions. 7th edition is an edition of Warhammer Fantasy that I think is kind of the redheaded stepchild of modern fantasy, or what would have been modern fantasy, not including the old world, where 6th edition is kind of beloved. 8th edition, especially up until the old world, was certainly beloved as well in a different group. And 7th was the one sat in the middle that felt like nobody liked or talked about very often.
Yeah, just often forgotten.
Right. And then if you go before 6th, it's like you got some old Hammer players that are like for 5th ed and stuff, 4th ed, and they'll do some cool stuff too. But kind of a different crop of people.
Yeah, usually if
there.
you look at people playing old editions, they're typically choosing either 6th or 8th. There's a silent majority maybe that sometimes come out when this discussion comes up on online forums that say, oh, you should play 7th with 6th ed army books. And we might get into that a little bit at the end. But yeah, we really wanted to do this episode sort of as a case study in what we talked about last episode about edition changes. We think this was a relatively good example of an edition change where there wasn't too many things that changed fundamentally. There was a couple things that we'll talk about, things like the way the magic pooled dice worked and things like that were pretty big changes at the time. But overall, it wasn't a fundamentally different game. A lot of it was streamlining. A lot of it was taking things that have been clarified in FAQs or erratas over the years and just integrating them into the rules as they were in the main rulebook. And so we think that this was by and large a good example. There's definitely some things in here that we have varying opinions on whether they were a good change or a bad change.
Right.
But we just thought this was a good case study and a relatively successful shift in editions, even though it does kind of seem like it gets lost in the history of fantasy.
In my experience, certainly. So what we're going to do here as a format, just to kind of keep things rolling, is pardon me, we found a list of changes. This was off the Warhammer-Empire.com forum, where somebody very kindly just listed out the key changes. We did look at the 7th ed rulebooks before this, but we didn't compare and contrast in depth. We found a list online that was highlighting the key differences.
Yeah, and this was from when this edition change happened. Right. And so this was, the people at the time. It's a primary source.
Right. So we thought we would just go down the line of all the main big changes and just kind of give our impressions. Do you have any thoughts before we just get going on that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So just rolling right along into the first one. Rolling double ones will automatically pass any psychology tests, even break tests. The break test... Oh, sorry. I read your notes there. So, for me, that is huge. That means you always roll for break tests. It sometimes happens, I wouldn't say super frequently, but it certainly happens sometimes in 6th ed where you just don't roll.
Yeah, it's just auto break.
You just have lost by so much that you're going to be at a 2 or less, to where it's less than 2. So it's just don't roll, or there's stuff like fear auto break, which I'm not sure how that works in this, to be honest.
I looked, and under the fear rules in the 7th edition rulebook, it specifies it's still worth rolling because the insane courage or whatever they call this rule.
So there you go.
Yeah, actually would still save you against fear. So I think for me, I like this change because it is such a small chance. What is it, like a 1 in 36 chance that you get a 2 or something like that?
1 out of 36.
Yeah. So it doesn't have a major impact on the game, but the feeling, the psychological feeling of, but there's a chance. I get to roll the dice and there's a chance that they're not going to run feels so much better than I just auto break. Cool. All right. Well, that wasn't fun. And so I think against things like fear, which can feel pretty overpowering in 6th edition, this just gives you that slight psychological feeling of having a little bit more control over the situation.
For me too, we're probably gonna say this a lot as we go through the list. This is adding consistency. Just always roll the break check.
Yeah.
Right? Like, let's not make weird exceptions where you have to do a bunch of math. Just roll the 2 dice, like, let's see if it matters.
Right, because if you get the double 1, we don't need to do the math on the combat res.
I like consistency, so I think that's a positive change overall. Some people might not like it. Doesn't bother me.
Yeah. The next one in this list was units flee directly from the largest unit that they're in combat with, and if they flee into impassable terrain or an enemy unit of unit strength 5 or more, they are destroyed. If the fleeing unit is unit strength 5 or more and they flee through a friendly unit, that unit has to take a panic test. Fleeing enemy units cannot cause crossfire, which I don't know if you came across this. I wasn't sure what they meant by that.
I wasn't sure either, to be honest.
But when pursuing, you pick a direction to chase, and all units fleeing in that direction instead of a specific unit, and then you catch each unit that you roll equal to or higher. So there's some situations there where some units may be running opposite directions,
right?
And so you might not be able to run down all of them. This was maybe one of the biggest changes in this edition, was how much more streamlined and clarified fleeing was, and that's an often found complaint about 6th edition, is how loosey-goosey it was. There actually was in the annual 2002, I think it was, a whole section about clarifying how fleeing worked in 6th edition because it was so confusing for people. And even then, there was a lot of weirdness about how they explained it, of like, well, there's this list of like 5 priorities, and so you need to like follow all of them, but if you can't follow all of them, then start from this end of the list and ignore them until you could do most of them, whatever kind of a thing. Things like not going through units, not going close to the enemy, that sort of a thing. But this definitely streamlined all of it, made it much more simple, had more specific ways to work it out when you actually run into an enemy unit, whether this is where it introduced the idea that you just sort of like pop out the other side if you didn't make it all the way across a unit. But yeah, I think for me this was a really good change just because it simplified something that was particularly complicated, and in some cases could cause contention between players about like, well, if I go this way, you're probably going to be able to charge me next turn with that unit, but if I go this way, then I'm probably going to get away. And now this is just very clear. You just go directly away from the unit with the largest unit strength, and now we know what happens when you run into whatever happens to be in your path in that very specific direction.
Sure. I like too that you pick a direction to chase. You're not picking a unit, so you can potentially overrun more than one unit at a time. I like that that's a little more clarified, generally cleaned up, and I like, again, starting to see these patterns referencing unit strength 5. You're going to see that a lot in these rules.
Yes.
I like the consistency of it again. Just, again, nail on consistency. This seems like a positive change.
Yeah.
Jumping from there, units in combat no longer take any panic tests. This is one I'm kind of lukewarm on first impressions. I'll be honest, I'm the first to forget a panic check when somebody or even when I charge somebody in the flank while they're in combat or for any other reason. Definitely happens. So for this reason, it's probably better because it probably got forgotten a lot. And I wonder if that was part of the motivation. Maybe the designers are just like, what are the things we just never do consistently? Again, consistency. And even maybe they were missing it, I wonder. And this just feels like a cleanup of the rules. I do like that you can charge somebody in the flank in 6, though, and they might like, we're getting charged in the flank, might just leave. But at the same time, this encourages more actual combat to happen, and fleeing before you even get to fight isn't always very fun. I would argue it's pretty much almost never fun, right? I guess. So this seems like a generally positive change. What do you think?
Yeah, I would largely agree. For me, in the similar way that you're saying there, the tactical benefit of flanking a unit becomes lessened here. Obviously, there are still other things. You still get the +1 for the flank charge, things like that. You could still negate rank bonuses if your unit's unit strength 5 or more. And so maybe there's plenty of benefit to getting that flank charge in, but it's just one thing that's been removed from that makes it a little less important to do that maneuvering, which again, maybe is one of those things that led into 8th being much less about maneuvering and much more about just slamming your giant blocks into each other across a static battle line and the whole thing. And I don't know if this was, again, like a seed planted that led towards those changes. Who knows? But Yeah, I think
It's worth noting, not
Yeah.
to cut you off, but this would also affect things like when you would break from combat.
true. This
Everybody
isn't-
around you would take panic, so that would affect in 6th. Whereas in this, it's like, oh, they're already locked in, so you won't see these sweeping, like, whole army retreats.
Yeah, just breaking because of bad panic checks.
Right.
Yeah. And so as an Empire player, definitely appreciate the change because they're particularly susceptible to panic, just kind of wrecking their entire day. So overall, I think it's probably a nice change.
Yeah.
The next one is that the player whose turn it is chooses the order of combat, and then they resolve that one combat entirely, including all the fleeing and pursuit that would happen because of it. And if the unit pursuing goes into another combat, like their pursuit move actually is enough to run into an enemy unit, then they will fight in that combat this turn as well. There is a limit to that. You can only do that once, so that second combat is the last time they're allowed to do that. If they if they pursue and overrun into yet another unit, they won't fight this turn.
Right.
But the other caveat is that that unit that you ran into can't have already fought. So now it does matter a lot more which order you do the combats in. You can kind of set up the possibility that I think I'm going to break this unit, and if I attack from this direction and I do this combat first, if I do break that unit, I'll probably overrun into that one. And so that adds another tactical level of considering the order in which you're going to complete your combats and how you end up orienting your units in order to make those charges so that they're in a position to do that. On the one hand, that's kind of cool because it adds that level of tactics to the game. On the other hand, it already feels bad enough when you get a unit bulldozed in one turn of combat and then that unit's overrunning, and then the fact that they also get to then potentially bulldoze another unit just could potentially create really feel bad moments. I think especially against like very lawnmower, weed whacker type armies that have that really big alpha strike capability. I'm thinking like a bunch of corn minotaurs or something just blasting into me, or like the charge of a Bretonian lance formation. Those already just annihilate my units, and so if they also get to fight another unit
On the
that
same
feels
turn.
really on the same turn, that could just feel extra bad. Now that being said, I think that's something like we talked about in our previous episode about edition changes, that I initially read that and I bristle at it because I can imagine all these horrible things. Now, how often is that actually happening? Really, probably not that often. And if it is, it's probably because I left my flank open and that big unit got a charge on my flank. So that's
Right.
also kind of like my bad. It's not happening when a unit's just charging into the front of another unit as often, that sort of a thing. Especially with the new flee rules, where it's much more clear that like you're just fleeing directly away from the unit that charged and that sort of a thing. So I think it's probably not as bad as my imagination can make it be.
Yeah.
But it just seems like a weird thing, especially with the caveat of like, but only one extra time can they fight, because now I have to like keep track of like, did this unit do that already? So I don't know. What do you think?
I'm of mixed mind. I want to acknowledge that I think this is one of the most contentious rules changes. If you go onto the 6th Ed fan pages and mention this, mention 7th Ed, I feel like this is the rule alongside one other that we haven't gotten to that is brought up the most. And they'll say, cavalry will just run over stuff and then
Yeah.
it'll fight another unit and run that unit over, and your infantry never gets to do anything. And I don't think that would happen for most infantry units in 6th edition army books, which
Okay.
again we'll kind of get to. Now you're right, there's stuff like Khorne Minotaurs that could potentially just run stuff down. They're like Grail Knights in a big bus. There's definitely some grinder, or rather not grinder units, blender units out there. But I think what kind of exacerbated this issue, and I'm trying to not get into talking about just army books here, but a lot of armies got big hammer units this edition in
Okay.
their releases. So I think that's kind of what combined with this. So it's like 6th edition army books, like, again, those blender units, or we can only think of, I really can, maybe 2 or 3 super really crazy ones, you know, that are fast and pardon me, that killy.
Yeah.
In 7th, I can think of 5 or 6. And then not even counting like some of the changes to certain infantry units too that got significantly more killy. So it's just this combination of everything's killing a lot more. So you're going to win combats more, and then potentially overrun into another one and kill even more. So I wonder if this is kind of a hand-in-hand sort of creating that negative play experience.
The doubling down on those.
What are we gaining here beyond there's some strategy of me picking the orders, I guess? What I would do is just keep that part in of picking the orders, because then maybe the order you do it in still allows you to get a flank charge.
Yeah.
But then just say they fight next turn or whatever, or they count as flanked. I don't know. Don't let them fight though. I feel like you could do a halfway point here and it'd be fine.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
you're
because it
also
could just
right.
add insult to injury, because this is only happening when something's already going horribly wrong for the other players.
So it feels like it's probably going to happen not very often. I think it might I think you acknowledged it. This is probably getting blown out of proportion a little bit, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like an objective improvement. So I'm kind of going from there. Units that are less than unit strength 5 do not cause panic. We kind of had this in 6th edition with the Empire detachments kind of not causing panic in parent units.
But this is also true for a lot of things.
Right.
But this was in our easily forgotten rules. It was like sometimes that's the caveat is the unit strength 5, but other times it doesn't matter what the unit strength is.
Just consistency. This is pretty much a straight improvement to the core rules, in my opinion. I see no downsides whatsoever.
Yeah, same. Because I think the only times it wasn't happening anyways were it seemed weird that it wasn't. So totally agree.
Yep.
The next one is skirmishers can now be march blocked, which didn't used to be the case in 6th edition. So your skirmishers had freedom of movement all the time, which really meant that they could just literally run circles around enemy units. On the one hand, with my initial impressions of skirmishers, I'd be like, absolutely, that's so powerful. It's so annoying that they're constantly running behind me. And so like any of my, my crossbowmen and handgunners can never shoot them because I have to keep turning around and they're move or shoot. And so I'll never be able to shoot them. It's so frustrating. I hate this. That being said, I don't know if this takes away too much of what makes skirmishers skirmishers. Another thing that I've learned over time is that the skirmishers attacking me really isn't that big of a deal. You can often ignore them. They're going to do a few wounds, but usually it's better off to just ignore the skirmishers and just do what you were going to do anyways and suffer the few wounds and c'est la vie. But I think this one I kind of go back and forth on. It feels like it makes an already powerful unit become a little less powerful, which I think usually is good, but I also haven't used skirmishers a lot, and so maybe I just am happy to see something I don't use be nerfed.
So I use stuff like this a lot. So this, I feel like the big obvious one is skinks.
Yeah.
Skinks are very negatively affected by this. A lot of almost inordinately so, because they're not a melee unit. They're really bad in melee. They're a ranged kind of support harass unit, but they have very short range.
So they do need to be close.
So they need to be close. So they're gonna, in order to shoot with just their javelins, they would be march blocked intrinsically. So it's kind of one of these things where they specifically are hurt, whereas other skirmishing units, like say I don't know why I said crossbowmen, archers, Empire archers. Ideally, they're shooting you from 12 plus inches away anyway, so they're not really affected by this in a lot of the time. So for me, it's who's being affected by this, and it's those melee skirmishers. There's not a lot of those in 6th Ed Army books, but the big ones I can think of are like dryads, and wood elves are famously very killy on skirmish formation. Stuff like that. I'm sure there's a few others. I don't know, furies. They're kind of meh, but combat-y focused skirmishers, war dancers, more wood elf stuff, are probably more negatively affected, and then again those short range skirmishers. I think skirmishers needed a debuff. 6th edition, I agree. I think they're too good. But I'm not sure this was the right thing to do, but I'm not sure what I would have done instead.
Yeah.
So I think something needed to happen, but I don't know what, and I don't have any better ideas. So I think this is fine. I'm kind of lukewarm on it. I think I'm a little biased because I feel like pretty much my favorite army is really directly impacted, like one of my favorite units. So it's just like, for me, it's very close to my heart. But part of me, though, at the same time is like, yeah, no, they're super annoying in 6th rules as written, because they do exactly what you just said.
Right.
And you're right. I think once people acknowledge and realize that they're actually not killing that much, they kind of like level up in the game a little bit. But and they kind of whatever. But this kind of just cements them more as they're the blocking, line of sight blocking, skirmish line, and that's kind of all they're gonna do, which is still a great thing
Still
to do.
very useful.
So
yeah, I think I would want to play with it and kind of see. I have probably only played 1 or 2 games of 7th edition in my life back when it first came out, because my brother and I got the Battle for Skull Pass starter set. And so I don't have much experience with this personally.
I don't even know if there's skirmishers in that starter set.
There's not. So I never would have used this rule. I probably didn't even know the rule existed when we played it. But yeah, so I think this is a rule that I would really have to see how it played over the course of a number of games to really have a strong opinion on this one.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't bother me. I think you said you bristled at that one rule. I think I was kind of like, This one I bristled, and
Fair.
I'm biased. I acknowledge it. Okay, going from there. Now we're into the magic phase with this one. You can only use a wizard's power dice for their own spells in addition to the army's base dice pool. So I'm going to explain a little bit here for listeners who don't know how 7th works. So in 6th, you just have a pool of dice, and any wizard can pull from it. You start with 2 base, and then you get 1 more for each power level of all the wizards in your army. Now you kind of have all these separate pools for each wizard, plus your army-wide one, is the way I like to think of it.
Yeah.
So you still get your 2 base that are army-wide, and then you get 1 for each level of the wizard in each wizard pool, plus items, etc. This gives you a lot more. Basically, you can't have these power batteries. I wanted to say a lot more of something, but you can't just have, I took a couple of level 2s, and then I had a level 4 Slan, and he used all the dice.
Exactly.
Now
right,
those
which is
level
very possible in
2s
6th.
actually have to do something on their turn, which I like. I also like that there's a little bit more differentiation, and it just seems better. I'm not sure. It's a little bit more fiddly, I admit, but I feel like it rewards higher level wizards more. I think 6th, you can get away quite a lot with just level 2s. There's some cheap magic items for many armies that allow you to use more than 3 dice on spells.
Right.
So you can just spam a bunch of level 2s and just roll on the dice and then
still get some of those higher level spells off,
spell, and just kind of like And now it's like, well, now a level 4, not only is he having more spells to choose from, but now he's got a bigger pool intrinsically. So it just seems like a bigger reward. So I like this change. What do you think?
I think for me, it makes a lot of sense thematically, because it feels much more like, this wizard has his own power dice. He's going to cast his own spells with those power dice. There's a little bit of the 2 dice you bring is supposed to be the general magic that exists in the old world that are your sort of base 2 dice. So it makes sense that anybody can tap into those. But in general, I think this is a really good change from a thematic side. I think, just to make an allusion to another game, Infinity has, at least in the past, I don't know what the current edition is doing, has suffered from the way that they do actions, because you sort of get activation tokens, but you can have your, like you're saying, your cheapo guys that just hide in the corner, and then the mega sniper dude can use all the activations, which makes no sense to me, like in a thematic way. And I think this is not nearly as potentially bad as that. And again, I haven't played much of Infinity, so I don't want to crap on that game over my impression of it.
It's fair to say that that's definitely a consistent negative thrown its way.
Yeah, fair enough. But again, just to bring it back to this, I think that's a similar thing where it feels right that each wizard should be able to use their own magic dice. I do recognize that does nerf things like a Slan Mage Priest list, where part of that is like, that's why you like bring the Skink Priest. That was like the whole point, is that they're boosting his magic kind of a thing. In my opinion, that's probably already powerful enough that if the Slan loses a couple magic casting dice, that's probably okay. So I'm not too worried about it. I think it's thematic. But again, I'd probably have to just play a few games to get a sense of, does it feel okay or not? But my sense is positive change. The next one is that the miscast chart was redesigned to be worse, so nastier, hurts you more often kind of a thing. And we've talked about this in the past as well, that the 6th ed one is pretty tame. There's nothing on there that will outright kill you. I think the worst that can happen is you suffer a single wound, which won't kill any wizard, I think, in the game. Has at least 2 wounds. And so right now, or in 7th edition, the miscast table, there isn't a single neutral result. Every single result on there is something bad happens to you, and I'm pretty sure all of them are permanent, like if you take the wound in some of the situations. But there's like at least like you forget the spell or something like that. I don't even think there's a you do nothing more this magic phase. I think everything comes with the potential of getting hurt, forgetting the spell, all of those sorts of things. And a double 1 is you're just dead. You get exploded, or I think it says like a hand reaches out from the warp essentially and snatches the wizard and takes him back in, or something along those lines.
No, that's, I think, literally it says a gigantic taloned hand emerges from the chaos gate.
There you go. And grabs your wizard. So I guess it makes magic even more swingy. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about this. On the one hand, magic can feel really powerful, so it's nice that it can also now have some pretty major negatives, that it actually is really dangerous to be casting these spells. But do I like just pushing swinginess even further? I'm not sure how I like that in general in a game, so I'm not 100% sure how I feel about it. But the fact that you only die outright on a double 1 isn't too bad. It's not like even 30% of the time or something that's going to happen. So I think probably it's a fine change overall. What do you think?
Looking at it pretty closely, even as you're speaking, I generally, for me, I think this is an improvement for me. Now, does this increase the chances of super feel bads with the double one for your slan dying or whatever? In my mind, this rewards taking items that actually protect you against miscasts, whereas in 6, they're completely a waste of points.
That's true, because they're not so bad anyway.
They're so milk toast, and it's like, I lost a wound maybe, or I can't cast this turn, and I was done anyway. Like, this feels more consequential. I like that it matters. It almost felt like a waste of time rolling sometimes on the other ones. Every once in a while something interesting would happen. But a lot of times it felt like it would just be like, well, the phase is done. And it was like, well, I already spent all my dice on that miscast, so I was kind of done anyway. So, I guess nothing bad has happened. For me, I think, while it has the potential for more feel bads, I think the narrative potential is greater.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Even the descriptions in them are pretty great.
Well, some of these are cool. Like, you miscast on a 5 or 6, the opposing player gets to cast a spell.
Yeah, which is fun. Keeps the game moving.
I think that's super cool. And there's nothing like that in the 6th ed miscast chart. And I think that's a neat way to kind of do a bad result that isn't just your guy getting hurt. They just get to do something cool. And I'm like, I like that.
That's fun.
I don't know. For me, I think this is generally better. Could they have maybe really tweaked it a little bit more? I don't know. I'd have to play with it more. But for me, 6th ed is just too milk toast.
Yeah.
It needs something more. This is, I think, a step in the right direction, if not, even if it's not perfect. And going from there,
I want to interject really quick.
Go ahead.
We didn't know what they were referring to earlier on as crossfire, so I've been doing some research while we're talking. It's interesting. This is like a relic of the past, because this isn't a rule anywhere in the actual rules, but it's something that people started calling a particular tactic that you could set up, at least from what I'm gathering from druchi.net.
Let's go.
Another old Warhammer forum.
Druchi, yeah.
And it seems like what they're referring to is people would say crossfire is where you set up a situation where a unit fleeing will definitely run into one of your units so that they're immediately destroyed, which was one of the changes to the flee rules. Because if you run into enemy unit of unit strength 5 or more, your unit is wiped out. Okay. So a crossfire is when you intentionally set up so that your unit is in the way of a unit that's about to flee,
to block
so that it dies. So you charge, make them flee, they run into your unit, they die.
Okay.
So that's sort of this fork maneuver that you're doing to force a unit to just get deleted by getting behind them so that they flee into you.
So just to make sure I'm following, does that not happen anymore in 7th, or it does?
It does. So this became a thing in 7th because of the change to the flee rules, because you didn't die when you ran into an enemy unit fleeing in 6th edition.
Cool. I mean, that doesn't... I mean, I guess that could result in some super feel-bads, but if somebody's fleeing from a unit into another one of your units, you had to work pretty hard to set that up, in my mind.
Exactly,
so
and it just makes sense. And again, it's
fine.
Caveated with the unit strength 5 or more, so it has to be a substantial unit. So, but anyways, just wanted to come back to that, since that was an interesting wording that neither of us knew what it meant, but now we do. So it's just a tactic that had arisen out of these new changes to the flee rules.
Live. Another one. Independent characters on their own can be picked off no matter how close they are to a unit, unless line of sight is blocked to them. And then it says, remember that troops on a hill can see over units to see characters behind them. I'm going to echo your notes on this, Cam. I don't like this change. I have no idea why they made it. I like that a character can kind of mingle between the lines. I like that a wizard can kind of rove between units. This kind of means everybody has to be in a unit now. Which I guess is fine, but
it just makes them less flexible. Also, and maybe I'm not as familiar with the army books of this edition as you are, but at least coming out of 6th, heroes really weren't that powerful, so they kind of needed this ability to move around the battlefield without just being sniped as easily. And so I think
heroes got more powerful, certainly, but I mean, this isn't 5th edit even remotely close. So
and I think I really appreciate in 6th edition it even describes why that rule is in there, as being because in the smoke and haze and uncertainty and confusion of the battlefield, you can't just tell that, oh, that's the hero over there standing near that bunch of other dudes that are the same size.
Yeah, you wouldn't know.
And so at a distance, you just wouldn't be able to tell the difference. And that makes sense to me thematically, and so I don't know that they explain in the rule book why they make this change, but I'm imagining not. It just is the way that it is now.
Yeah, it just seems weird. So it'd be like, oh, my longbowmen archers can now like snipe at your wizard behind your,
as long as they're on a hill,
swordsman, because they're on a hill, and it's just like I don't know, it just feels odd to me.
It does. And so like you said, it's gonna just force pretty much heroes to always have to be in units, which often is the case anyways, but in the battle we just played and did a battle report on, both of us were running our wizards around outside of units and doing some interesting things, and I'd be much more scared to even bother trying that if I knew that they could just get killed. I mean, I guess this is what happened in the Fellowship of the Ring. Spoiler alert if you haven't read it yet, but in the book, Boromir gets shot by a whole bunch of orc arrows. It's not just lurts, but he gets like taken down by a hail of orc arrows. So I guess it's that kind of vibe. But he didn't have a whole army around him. It was just him.
He had some halflings. Yeah. They were not his same base size or whatever. They couldn't. They didn't count. No.
But another
less than 5 unit strength.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, or Hobbit's a half unit strength per model. I don't know. The next one is that characters in units cannot be picked out even if on a different sized base, as long as they're under unit strength 5. So for me, this feels like a really weird change in the other direction, because this makes it in 6th edition, if you had, for example, a cavalry mounted hero in a unit of infantry, then you could snipe them out of the unit with your longbowmen on a hill or whatever, which I don't like about 6th edition, because that also just feels bad and feels weird that you can just snipe people like that. Because even if you could pick them out, I think it's hard to just like have everybody aim exactly at that guy. Anyways, but so this makes the heroes more survivable, but only if they're in a unit. So I like this change, but it just seems at odds with the previous change. Like, why did they do two things but that kind of go in opposite directions? I'm not sure. It just
really incentivizes heroes have to be with units, and there's no downside. So you can put your wizard on a horse with your swordsman, no downside, and then if late game he needs to fly off on his horse, I guess he can.
And then he'll get sniped by longbowmen. Yeah, but I do like this because it is thematic. I think in the past I've been wary of putting my heroes on horses, or if I do, I know like they have to just like, I have a really cool chaos sorcerer on a horse model for one of the old ones, and I love that model, but if I take him, he has to go with the chaos knights, and I don't really want him to be with the chaos knights because I don't want him to charge into a big enemy unit of combat people or whatever their knights are charging into. but if he's not with them, then he's just going to get sniped. So this just would let me use my cool model in more ways. So I like this change.
I agree. I don't see really too much of a negative. I think people were doing this in certain units in 6th anyway. It was pretty rare, but I know like one of the things you would see, and I have seen, was like for Lizardmen, you do the Scarvet with Great Weapon, Charm of the Jaguar Warrior, where he's like speed 9 or whatever.
Oh, right.
And you'd put him in with like swarms. And sure, he could be shot out of that unit or whatever, but they were skirmishers or whatever, so it was like he's harder to hit, etc.
Yeah.
And then he would just move up skirmishing and then just shoot out 18 inches and put out a bunch of strength 7 attacks. And I've seen that be kind of cute, just to like disrupt skirmishers and things like that. But now this is even better, so it's kind of cute. Don't mind it.
I like it.
Okay, here we go. A rank needs to be 5 wide to count for combat resolution. So this is another one of the big changes that I feel like gets a lot of press, at least in the 6th ed groups.
Yeah.
This, I don't know. I don't like it. I think it nerfs infantry, generally speaking. Now the units just have to be bigger in order to get the exact same strength they would have had. Sure, they might get one more guy in combat. Woohoo. So maybe the game will be slightly killier, I guess, theoretically, statistically. But it just nerfs infantry. Units have to be more expensive than they did before. Also, it's easier to knock off rank bonuses than before. You could take units 6 wide before with the knowledge that you had a couple of wounds before you'd lose a rank bonus. Now you get... Or actually, you would have had 3, sorry. And now you get 2. So it's just like these little small incremental changes that just nerf infantry that I think is part of 7th Ed's reputation of being like cavalry hammer.
Yeah.
Where they charge, they run over the infantry unit, and then they overrun into the other infantry unit, and then they kill that one too. And it's all these small changes that have added up to kind of affect them. And I don't really like the change. So
yeah, I would agree. In general, I like the feel and look of having smaller units in 6th edition. And on the other hand, I do really like the odd-numbered frontage that lets you have your banner dead center, because that does just look really cool. But I agree that pushing things towards larger units, I'm just not a fan of. It feels like this is a seed planted for going into the insane unit sizes in 8th edition again, and so this is just one step in that direction. Now I know that's probably unfair to say, because I think in previous editions to 6, I think it might have been 5 wide for a rank bonus as well.
I can't remember that, to be honest with you. It may have been. I don't know. I think 6 struck a good chord, though.
Yeah, I felt like it was the right size. I still feel like I have big blocks of units, but it still feels much more manageable. It feels like I can still paint the whole
16
unit.
16 guys still looks good. A 4x4
totally
looks
agreed.
just fine. And I still regularly run 5 wide units, but it's like a tactical decision of I want to get more guys fighting because I think this is a killy unit or whatever.
Yeah.
But now, I don't know, that's kind of been taken away, it feels like. And I'm not a fan.
Agreed. And yeah, who knows? It's hard to say retrospectively whether this was a change intended to get people to buy more models. Who knows? But it'd be easy to see it that way as, well, now you're just forcing me to have to buy another rank, because if I have a unit of 16, I can't now have my full rank bonus unless I buy more models. So yeah. The next one is another pretty big change from 6th edition. It's that both the standard bearer and battle standard bearer stack their +1 combat res bonus. So you would get a unit with a +2 combat res bonus if it has a battle standard bearer and a regular standard. I like this change because it just makes it easier to keep your big block of troops that has the BSB in it alive. Getting that extra combat res is nice. It makes the BSB feel extra special, like the unit is really rallying around it and cares about keeping it alive. So I think taking it just becomes a more impactful choice. Maybe that means it's an auto take. I think it kind of already was for most armies, so I don't mind. I think it's cool.
I think this is strictly better. It's more consistent. It often led to army building and optimization from people who weren't as familiar with the rules, and even those who were, like ourselves. You just forget because you for me, again, how I do army building, it would be like I'd make the unit, and then I'm making the hero, who's the BSB, and then I kind of put him in, and I just did full command, right?
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not thinking about it. So this just makes more sense. I think it's more consistency, and I don't see it's being super OP. The BSBs are usually punished anyway on what they can even take.
Right.
So it's not like they're killing oodles and oodles of guys. So not a big I think it's an improvement. Following that up, unless you had final thoughts. Nope. Panic ranges are all now 6 inches. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Yeah.
Oh, thank goodness for standardization. There's no reason for this not to be standard. 6 is fine. I don't care. I just needed it to be consistent because it felt like, I think we did confirm it was different ranges.
It was for different types of tests and things like that.
Was it 4 and 6 that we found out it was?
That or 5 and 6, we still can't even remember.
I can't even remember, and we had an episode about it, and it's just, this is just better.
Yeah.
So
all the old ones seemed arbitrary. The differences that were slight variations, so I would love to hear why those were the choices at the time, but I think it just, the amount of impact that this would have on the game is negligible compared to the fact that it's now just easy to remember that everything is 6 inches for panic ranges.
Yep, I echo everything.
The next one is lapping around is gone. Wah, wah. Units that win combat may, however, add models to the front rank or turn to get more models into combat. I think an interesting thing here is that in either of those cases, it has to be to get more models into combat. If that's not happening, they're not allowed to do it. Personally, I'm sad to see lapping around disappear because I thought it was a good option for pushing what could have been a static combat that was just going to drag on for a really long time. This could push it to a conclusion because you could get that flank bonus and eventually that rear bonus and keep pushing more and more attacks into the enemy, which they're obviously getting some more attacks as well on the side and whatnot, but it just means more dice are getting rolled, so a conclusion is going to happen sooner rather than a combat just sitting there for turn after turn after turn. So I really like lapping around. I know people often have a hard time remembering it and people forget to do it, and even I do sometimes, but I don't really think it's as fiddly as people make it out to be. So that being said, sad lapping around's gone. However, the second part of it, I really feel like you could just separate these out into two different things that happened. Lapping around went away, but this other thing could also be true even with lapping around, honestly, which is that you can add frontage or turn if you win a combat. So a common issue with 6th edition that people always complain about, at least in our group, is that if you get attacked in the flank, you're always going to be in the flank. There's no possibility to ever turn and face the enemy. And this just gives you that opportunity. Now, it's still pretty hard because you have to win combat, and the chances of winning combat while you're being attacked in the flank, you're, fighting an uphill battle in that sense. But if you do manage to win, then you can just choose to turn to face your opponent, and now you're in a much better position to survive that situation. So I really like that. I think it just makes the game more interesting and fluid and keeps things a lot more exciting. And then obviously adding people to the front, depending on unit frontage difference, that could get you more attacks like lapping around would do, but there's a limit to that because usually that's probably only going to be like 2 guys maybe, and then you're going to have maxed out what you could be hitting. But maybe in a multi-attack situation where you have multiple units spread across your frontage, then maybe you could be getting more and more. But even as with lapping around, you'd be potentially losing rank bonus to do this. So
sorry.
The last thing I was going to say is, if I was writing the rules, I think maybe I would just, and if we were going to like house rule this into 6th edition, I think I'd rather make the turn to face a leadership test based thing rather than winning, because it feels a little bit more like do we have the discipline to turn and face this new threat? Not did we win the combat? We can turn to face the threat, because if there's literally nothing else going on, like it just, seems more like a leadership based thing. And I think that would be something that maybe you would do at the beginning of your own movement phase. Roll a leadership test. If you pass the leadership test, turn to face your enemy or whatever kind of a thing.
Right.
Obviously, that's not what 7th edition is. That's just me throwing my own ideas into the mix right now. But what do you think about the actual changes here in 7th edition?
I'm less enthusiastic about lapping around as you. However, I think I've come to realize its value more. That being said, I'm not like devastated. I feel kind of lukewarm on this.
Yeah.
I do like that you get to turn or whatever to engage. I think, yeah, that is kind of annoying. I know in 8th, it's like you can do a free reform, I think, if you win combat or something. So it's a little more extreme. But so again, an evolution of this. We see, I think 8th was kind of, at least in these sorts of situations, is moving towards, okay, it's easier to move your guys. It's easier to get out of these awkward situations, which I think are generally a lot of positive changes. I like a lot of those things. But yeah, no, lapping round is kind of just, they just kind of removed an element of strategy and tactics. And yeah, just replacing that with you can kind of maximize your frontage a little bit isn't really at all the same at all. And for most units, unless you're running a really strange mock-up, pulling guys from the back to maximize your frontage is probably almost never worth it.
Yeah.
Because you're probably going to lose a rank bonus. Especially now that you need 5.
That's also true, unless maybe you have guys that have a lot of attacks or something like that, where it's really worth getting. Maybe you'd get 2 kills versus the 1 combat res.
Sure.
I don't know, but
which is, again, you're right, and I know
but
you
it's the same math with lapping round. So
well, yeah, but no, you're right. A lot of the 7th ed books, though, you bring up a good point. There are like a lot of elite infantry.
That's true. It's like Chaos Warriors got an extra attack base.
Chaos Warriors go up to 2 attacks. There's certain high elf elite infantry that I think got extra attacks. There's a lot of what's the dark elf?
Executioners.
No, the other one.
Blackguard
got 2 attacks. So a lot of those infantry units that we kind of lament in 6th got significantly buffed in 7th ed, which good, because that was one of my criticisms of 6th. But it's like, yeah, maybe then it is worth it, because you're putting up, you're not just getting 1 attack each, you're getting
as long as you could get 1, then it was worth trying for the 2nd, I suppose.
Right. So fair enough, that might be a little different, but yeah, I don't know, kind of ambivalent a little bit / curious how it would work to just include lapping round. With, I mean, it's not hard to pull out or put in, right? It's not
right, because anytime it would become an issue, they just snap back to where they were.
It's kind of modular in that respect. But yeah, following that up, we have charging units must bring as many models from both sides into contact as possible. 6th edition kind of pushed you to do this in a gentlemanly way anyway. There was a part, I think it's in one of the rules appendixes.
It is in the main book, yeah.
In the main book towards the back, where it shows an example of a notorious clipping example where 2 units meet like corner to corner. And it literally says, if you follow the rules as written, this is what will happen. And it shows like a really awkward combat where 2 guys are fighting out of 2 blocks of 20. And then it says next to that, but this is what they should aspire to. And it shows them like shoved over significantly to where like 80% of them are in full contact. So generally speaking, even if it's not rules as written in 8th, I've kind of taken that as permission to let's maximize.
Yeah, and I think this just kind of codified that approach and put it more in the main rules, clarified the wording around it. It is still kind of vague, to be honest, because there's the whole thing like you need to wheel to maximize, but you don't have to complete the wheel to maximize if it would mean that you don't make the charge anymore. And so it never does come right out and just say, once you get in and the 2 units, you've closed the door and the 2 units are face to face, you should slide the units over. It doesn't actually say that.
Right.
So I don't know that it's as clear as it could have been, or it's as much we're going to just force maximization as sometimes we play it, where we're just like, just slide the units because it's more fun that way. But I think it's a step in that direction at least. And I think another thing, I looked up the actual rule in the book to see how it was worded. But it says it has this sort of like weird phrasing of, if you're unable to maximize, then it's okay to shift the unit that was charged in order to make it maximize. But it says in the case of another unit or impassable terrain or whatever, it literally says or whatever. So who knows? It's just like, I didn't have enough move, so we're just going to slide them. Yeah. So I think our interpretation of just nudge the units a little bit to make them maximized is fine, because it's just more fun, more carnage.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not upset that they worded it more clearly, because, I think 6 sometimes people will bring up the clipping issue a little bit. And even though, again, I think it's addressed in the main rule book if you read the rules appendix, but
Yeah, but what does it mean to aspire to that?
Right.
Is that still within the rules, or does that mean just slide the unit over?
Maybe I don't want to aspire.
Yes, but I want to aspire to it, but I don't want to move farther than I'm allowed to move.
Right.
So
There you go. Yeah, something.
So yeah, I think our approach is fine, but I think you could apply that equally here, even though it's more clear, but still a little bit vague because it doesn't come right out and say slide the units to make them maximized once they come into contact.
Yep.
But the next one is no more charge redirection. So in 6th edition, you could do this sort of weird thing where if a unit fled and you were no longer going to make contact with them, you could choose to charge a unit you hadn't previously been able to charge.
Yep.
This, I think, works out essentially the same because what they were kind of saying is if you couldn't already see the unit, that unit was probably behind the unit that you were charging, and so then you would now be allowed to charge them.
Right.
This is a much simpler way to say it, which is just if they're directly in your charge path, you can now overrun into them. You're not changing direction of your charge at all. You just have to keep moving forward. And if there's a unit there, great, you hit them. So I think this is a great change. It just simplifies something that I think was already the intent of the 6th edition rules. It just wasn't very clear.
Yes. Charge redirections is something I'm fascinated by because it's something that makes sense, but if you make it too easy, it's way too powerful. But if you make it too hard, it feels like it's never doing anything ever.
Yeah.
So they kind of lean towards it's very difficult to make it work, which is probably the safer bet. Otherwise, again, then the idea and the tactical choice of tactical retreats is kind of nullified.
Right.
And I think in 8th edition, don't quote me 8th ed people, because that's the one rule book I don't own. I think you just take a command check and then you can choose to redirect anybody in range.
Oh, wow.
And it's one of those, don't quote me on that. But part of that too, though, with that whole thing is that you roll
the random
distance.
Charge distance. Yeah.
So it's kind of like, so maybe they can get away with that.
That's
Whereas
true.
here it's
That's
I'm always
variable.
going 16 inches or,
Yeah.
or whatever. But I'm kind of I'm mixed bag on that. I don't know. Doesn't bother me. I kind of
I think it's great.
Okay. Big one. I don't know how much detail we want to go into this. So the lores of magic just got changed and reworked. Generally speaking, I think they're better.
Yeah, and it's pretty subtle changes overall.
Yes, a lot of spells got tweaked. I think what they did, generally speaking, is the 3 bad lores, air quotes, of metal, beasts, and I would say life from 6th ed. Although I think there's some life fans out there, got pretty much redone and made better. Life and beasts got kind of errated in 6th halfway, and I think heavens did too, but as a nerf. So they kind of incorporated a lot of that, but metal was kind of left, and I always want to try to take metal in 6, but it's just it seems not good. In this, they've given it a whole new life where it kind of has this idea where a lot of it ignores armor saves.
Yeah.
Which I like because a lot of it's about heating their armor up to make it really hot. So it's why would you get a save from your armor against the armor melting on top of you? So
True.
At least that's the way I look at it. The spell is the rule of burning iron. He's literally he's melting your armor.
Yeah.
And I'm you shouldn't get an armor save for your armor melting. It's more powerful the more armor you have. So it kind of turns that on its head, which I think is fun. So that just seems overall better. Fire, whatever. Death's kind of the same. Shadow, there's a few tweaks there. The only lore I'm not in love with is I feel like they kind of dinged light a little bit. I actually kind of low-key really liked light in 6th. In 7th, it just feels like stuff healing energy got worse. It only heals 1 wound now. It used to heal an entire model all their wounds.
Yeah,
which
but that was added to Lore of Life. Now
Correct.
they have the spell that does that.
Right, so it's some of that cool. So it's on a 5-up, so it's real easy. But
yeah,
I don't know. I always liked the combo of maybe I'll heal a Stegodon back to full from anywhere on the table, things like that. It's got this real big incentive of being good against undead and demons, which is kind of cute, I guess. But I don't know. It feels like light came out a little bit worse for wear, but everything else I feel is better.
Yeah, I've noticed that a lot of the, especially lower level casting, went down 1, which I think is a good combination with the changes to the power dice
Yeah.
pool, because you're more likely to have like one die left over with a guy or something like that you might want to be able to just try and get something off. So I think giving those lower level spells a slightly lower casting value is nice for that. But a few things did just go up. There's a few spells that are just totally different in here, even though most of it stayed largely the same. I think Lore of Fire is almost identical, but Lore of Metal, there's no more Bane of Forged Steel, which that looked pretty brutal. But
that looked brutal, or it would do nothing.
Yeah, and I guess so. It's all or nothing. But Spirit of the Forge is what replaced it. It's on a 12 up, but this is also really good.
That one looks amazing. Yeah.
Against Empire Knights, so this has a scaling strength depending on how good your armor is. So against a 1-up armor save like Empire Knights, it's strength 7. So you get 2d6 strength 7 attacks with no save. So that is going to annihilate a unit of Empire Knights. Because you'd be wounding on 2s then,
Yep.
and then
And
no
then
save.
no armor, so they just die.
On 2s.
Yeah.
So you could take out an entire massive unit of Empire Knights with that spell. Of course, it is on a 12, but I think things like that existing in this edition mean you definitely want to be bringing a Dispel Scroll.
Yeah.
Just so that if something like that's about to go off, you can just say, no, I don't want that massive unit that I spent a lot of points on to just be deleted.
Sure.
I just have like one thing from each lore I wanted to point out.
Okay.
Lore of Shadow, Creeping Death is much more specifically good against low toughness models.
Yep.
So it's way
Strength
more
1,
attacks,
right?
but it's only strength 1. So 3d6 strength 1 attacks instead of d6 strength 3 attacks. I like that because it's just a little more different than the other basic attack spells in the other lores. So I think it's cool if you know you're going against a horde army like Skaven or something, or Skinks. Maybe you just want to take that because you'll get more of the dice against it. In, let's see, Pit of Shades, that must also be Lore of Shadow though, right?
That is Lore of Shadows.
So this changed to straight casualties instead of a strength 3 hit.
Yep. This is a this thing is scary now.
Yeah, but it also utilizes the initiative test, which
Yep.
I like to see. More reasons to do those hardly ever used characteristic tests.
Yep.
But that's pretty bad. If you fail, you just die instead of it taking a strength 3 hit. So that
Poor
could be pretty
ogres.
rough.
I have
with
3
all those
wounds, and I have really bad initiative. Just, nope, I'm dead.
Yeah, so that would feel bad as well. I didn't even think of the ogre matchup, but that's a great point.
Yeah.
But yeah, so tough. It is a 12 plus, but again, maybe we just need Dispel Scrolls more in this edition. Lore of Beasts, they got rid of Eagle's Cry, which is nice because Eagle's Cry could cause units to flee off the table on turn 1 immediately, which can just feel bad and suck to just lose a whole unit on turn 1 before you've even gotten a chance to move them. So I don't mind that being gone. In Lore of Heavens, Celestial Shield is a new addition, and that gives a 4+ ward save to the whole unit, and I love seeing that. There's not a ton of defensive spells.
It's only against shooting.
Yeah, but yeah, it's just something that's slightly different than what any other lore is bringing.
Right.
And I think previously there was stuff like -1 to hit, and I think that might have gone away from Lore of Shadow that used to be in 6th edition or something.
I think you're right.
But yeah, I like it because it's just something a little bit different and could be good against certain armies, Wood Elves or something like that. Lore of Light, super nice to be able to cast Faz Illumination on other characters. In 6th edition, you could only cast it on the wizard themselves. So I wish I could see that happening with the Sword of Rune as well.
Oh, yeah.
From the Lore of Fire, because that's another one that it's cool, but it's not that often that you end up in a combat with a wizard because you don't really want to be anyways. And so, it's just nice. It makes it just a much more utilitarian spell since you can cast it on another character also. And then the Lore of Life, you already kind of mentioned this, but they toned down the Gift of Life, but also toned down the...
Well, I think the Gift of Life and Life actually still heals full. The
Lore
of Life.
They toned down just the casting value though, right?
Oh, did they? I'm not sure on the casting value, but I know on the Lore of Light healing energy got nerfed.
Oh, that is what I have here. Lore of Life damage output was toned down.
Okay.
Interesting. So wait, they must have replaced something. Yeah, I didn't write enough notes here. But anyways, I think Lore of Light maybe used to have some more damage stuff, and they've now replaced it with some more...
It's got some more utility. Yeah. Cleansing Flare is like a new drain life, but it doesn't ignore armor. Yeah. I don't know. It's fine. I think Light, again, for me, came out like the worst. light.
Yeah,
not
I
life.
think so. And yeah, especially because then Lore of Life has the Gift of Life, which was the thing that used to be for Lore of Light. Wow, this is getting really confusing now.
Yeah, sorry.
I was also sad to see Death Dealer replaced in the Lore of Death, because that's just a fun one where as your guys are dying, they get one last attack to make. But that maybe is another one that just is easy to forget, and it doesn't end up happening. But Doom and Darkness got... Let's see. Oh, I also don't like that they replaced Death Dealer with Walking Death, which is identical to Shades of Death from the Shadow lore. And it's just a bummer when things are identical to other lores. It's nice when they're just a little bit different. But Doom and Darkness got a pretty big buff. It's only a 9+ to cast. It used to be a 12+ to cast, but you're getting the exact same effect. So that's pretty tasty.
They moved Drain Life up to the level 6 spell. So Drain Life used to be the 5, which is interesting. So they swapped it because they realized Drain Life's pretty nuts.
Yeah. Yeah, with no armor saves.
Yeah, it's great.
But anyway, so probably went on too long on that, but just wanted to highlight a few of those key changes in the lores that have been reworked. But again, if you're going to play 7th and you're using magic, definitely that's something that you want to read very carefully, because there are some subtle minor changes in there. But yeah.
Shout out, just before we move on, to Lore of Beasts, because I think that one, along with Metal, came out the best. I love that they put Bear's Anger at number 1. It was not that before, but now you can guarantee that you can go fighty wizard bear guy. And I love that you can guarantee it. Whereas before you could be like, well, I can try. Now you can go into it like as an Empire wizard.
And just decide that's how I'm playing
and
this
just
guy.
Like bring defensive like talismans or something, and just know I'm gonna take Bear's Anger.
And he's going in the front line.
He's gonna go into the front line and bear people, and I'm like, I love that. So
should he ride on a horse and be bear?
I don't know. Let's see.
Let's put him on a horse. Put him in a block of infantry.
It doesn't.
Since we can.
It says he has to be unit strength 1.
Oh, bummer. Oh well. Still fun.
Yes.
All right, the next one is swarms lose wounds if they lose combat in a similar manner to undead. So it's kind of like the crumble thing. I haven't used swarms a ton, so I wasn't initially really sure about this one. It does make them a lot less useful as tar pits, because that's kind of like the point of swarms, is to tar pit units that then take a while to chew through. That being said, I always am annoyed at big multi-wound, many attack models like swarms, because it's rare that especially if they got the charge on you, it's rare that you're going to take out an entire base in that first round of combat, and then they're getting all their attacks back against you the next turn. And so it can feel really hard to stand up against that. So I think this helps offset that a little bit. But because it kind of makes them worse at what they're doing, and I don't know in the new army books, but they're not particularly cheap in 6th editions. You're paying kind of a lot of points. Yeah. And then if they're just going to crumble away, that doesn't feel great. But I don't know. What do you think?
This, I think, makes swarms unplayable as they are in 6th edition. Swarms went from very good in 6th to pretty much never taken because of this rule.
Wow.
And yes, when 7th came around, they pretty much cut swarm costs in half.
Oh, wow.
If you want a forecast of what this looks like, you just have to play Tomb Kings in 6th edition, because they have an undead sswarm. So they basically got to live this life beforehand. Theirs are probably some of the better ones too, though, because they have poison, which makes up for a lot of issues.
Oh, yeah.
But, oh, man, you hit the nail on the head when you said it kind of defeats their purpose. I think this is almost too extreme of a change. They die very quickly. And again, at 6th ed prices in points, that is. It's very hard to justify. I think a jungle swarm's at 60 points a base or whatever. Like, I'm paying 180 points for something now that used to hold up something maybe pretty consistently for 3 or 4 combat rounds. Now it's going to hold them up maybe 2.
Yeah.
Because they're still taking a lot of wounds. They're going to lose combat by a lot.
The big thing is losing combat res.
And now, whereas I would have held up a swordsman unit for 4 rounds, now I hold them up maybe 2. Because I'm going to crumble by like 5.
Yeah.
So
But if they cost half, maybe that works out.
Maybe if they cost half, it works out. I haven't admittedly played with the 7th ed rules, but or army books, that is. But if you were going to do the 7th ed core rules with the 6th ed army books, that is frequently
That's true. Cited. This would be a really bad combo then.
In my opinion, makes a lot of swarms in 6th ed army books pretty much immediately unplayable.
Yeah, at that cost.
I don't have the exact jungle swarm costs for 7th ed lizardmen memorized, but I imagine it was dropped significantly just because of this.
Yeah, as it should be.
So it's what I would have done instead was, rather than implement this rule, I would have kept them the same, but I would have just lowered the number of wounds per base. 5 is pretty excessive. Let's put it down to 3. They do.
Honestly, that would be an easier solution.
They do that in 40K. Most swarm bases have 3 wounds. Make them cheaper to compensate a little bit, but
that would have been way easier.
I feel like this is really swingy and can result in weird situations where you charge your swarms in to a big brick, which I guess now they would just say never do that. But I don't know what's their role then if they're not. I don't know. It just This feels like they lost their whole reason for existing.
Yeah.
To me. So I don't know. Your mileage may vary. After that, I like this one. Oh wait, no, I don't. I don't like this one. The armor save for hand, weapon, and shield only applies to models fighting in front of the unit. I don't know why this exists. This seems needlessly specific in an edition where most of the changes seem like they're for increasing consistency and intuitiveness. This just seems to fly in the face of that. Also, it's just another nerf to infantry.
Yeah.
Admittedly minor or whatever, because ideally they're fighting to the front anyway, but it's just another thing I gotta remember now when I'm in the flank. I have parry. I have parry all the time. I know some games, and I think Warhammer's done this, where it's like where you get shot in the front, your shield gives you like an extra bonus or something, and I'm like, okay, I can see that, but this, I don't know. I don't like it. It just nerfs infantry.
Yeah, I agree. It seems needlessly specific for the direction it seems like a lot of these other changes are going. On the one hand, it kind of makes some sense that you're like a formed unit that's ready to defend to the front and that you wouldn't get as much of that bonus. So I can see that in some design, but it just doesn't feel as much like it fits here. Oddly enough, when we first started playing 6th edition, I definitely thought that this was a rule in 6th edition. Somehow it was rattling around in my brain still. And so I played this way for at least a few games for a while, but I think it's a weird thing because on the one hand, it makes the sword and board combo a little worse, which we complained about being clearly better than spears and halberds. But I would rather have seen those get buffed rather than to nerf this thing, especially because in this edition with cavalry becoming more powerful, it just seems like, why don't we push all the infantry up to be as good as the swordsmen used to be? Right. But yeah, so I agree. I don't love this change, but
Yeah, I would have rather seen buffs to the other options. I agree 10,000%.
Yeah, next one's a quick one. Psychology transfers to your mounts and vice versa. So if you have a character on a mount and one of them causes fear, the other one does too. I don't know if I'm just missing something, but it seems like when would that ever... Like, you can't charge a character that's on a mount without charging their mount. So they would cause fear because you're charging them both at the same time.
I'm not sure when this came into effect. It's kind of confusing to me as well.
Yeah.
So...
anyways, it's true. So if your mount has a rule or your character has a rule, they pass it on to each other.
Cool.
Moving on.
Templates which land in combat among both friendly and enemy troops no longer randomize hits. Instead, they follow the Warp Lightning Cannon's rules, and all models, friend and foe, under the template take hits. This, to me, just seems more intuitive. I don't like having to randomize everything all the time. It's kind of fiddly. It takes a long time. Just see where the template is. Just
and
go.
It hits those people.
Hey, they got hit, and some of them died.
Yeah, and I like that. It just more common sense.
Yep.
Next one is only unit strength 1 skirmishers receive their -1 to hit penalty when being fired at. I think this makes more sense since the whole point of that rule is that they're small and dispersed, and so if you had a larger skirmisher, they wouldn't be gaining as much of that bonus as the smaller one. That being said, I don't know how many skirmishers there are that are higher than unit strength 1.
The obvious one that I think people are supposed to be thinking of is like flyers, but flying skirmishers specifically have unit strength 1 because they don't want them to break ranks easily. Yeah. So I'm like trying to think of who's in skirmish formation and isn't unit strength 1. I'm probably missing somebody.
There's some like ogre skirmishers or something.
Swarms, I guess.
Oh, maybe more nerfs to swarms.
So more nerfs to swarms. Yeah, that's true.
But they're
actually.
Small targets. Are the swarms still small targets in this edition?
You might be right. I don't know. I think that's more for seeing over things versus.
Well, that in 6, small target was a -1 to hit.
Was it? Okay, yeah. I don't know.
I thought.
But It might be, but I know in 6 they had the skirmish formation for the jungle swarms and lizard men, but I would assume, being swarms, they're no longer unit strength 1, that they wouldn't get it. Which is fine. I mean, there's a swarm of things you just shoot. It's like, how did you miss it, right? You just hit some of the snakes or whatever. But yeah, I guess more nerfs to swarms is what kind of I take away from that.
Yeah, fair enough.
Did you have that one? You did. Stupid units no longer fight with half their models. Wizards riding a stupid mount may not cast spells. Units which move forward due to a failed stupidity check and run into enemy units count as performing a normal charge. Stupidity does not affect units in close combat. This just kind of simplifies stupidity in a very nice way, in my opinion. I do find it interesting that the wizard can't cast even if their mount is stupid.
Yeah, it's funny. I read the rule for it in the book, and it says like that if they fail the stupidity, they stumble forward half their move or 3 inches or whatever. But then when it talks about the wizard not being able to cast, it says, as they struggle to hang on. It's like, struggle to hang on, it's stumbling forward slowly? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, that one is maybe the only part that I'm kind of confused on, because that just tells me you're never putting your wizard with a stupid mount. I don't know how often that comes up. But
yeah. I don't know. Can you put like a dark elf sorceress on a or on a cold one or something?
Probably. Good call. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, it seems fine. I like that biggest takeaway for me is that it does not affect units in close combat.
Yeah, it's
I
a nice
like
buff.
that trolls, once they're in there and fighting you, they shouldn't just like, oh, I forgot I'm fighting you. Okay, they could have gotten stupid and distracted on the way. But, like, if you're, like, sword fighting them, I feel like they should acknowledge that you're sword fighting them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know. They have, like, some immediate awareness, right? Like,
And that's how they narratively describe it in the rules, is they say their fighting instinct takes over at that point, which makes sense. It's a common sense thing. It's narrative, so I'm in favor of it.
Yeah, seems better to me. Yeah. So I like this simplification / clarification, or whatever you want to call this.
I just fact check myself, and there is no -1 to hit small targets in 6th edition either. I don't know where I picked that up.
I think there is a small rule, but it has to do with like seeing over.
Yeah.
For line of sight purposes.
Who knows? If there's some other game system that has small targets that are -1 to hit, please let me know so I don't feel like I'm crazy.
I'm sure it exists. It might be a 40K thing.
Maybe it is. All right. The next one is troops that are immune to psychology automatically pass all panic, fear, and terror tests and ignore being outnumbered by fear and terror causing units, but they do not ignore all psychology. So let me start on the first hand. I like that ignoring the auto break by outnumbering due to fear is nice. Wasn't that true though in 6th edition?
Troops that are immune to psychology automatically pass. So,
or did they pass fear tests, but they could still auto break from being outnumbered?
I was under the impression I was under the impression that they couldn't be auto broken from fear. But maybe I'm wrong. The reason I always highlight that, and here's my reasoning for thinking that, was that I always kind of bemoan that Temple Guard aren't immune to psychology in 6th, where they are in like all the other ones, and it bothers me because they can auto break from fear because they don't have immune to psychology, was my understanding. So
here's the immune to psychology rule from 6th. Troops that are immune to psychology are never affected by fear, terror, frenzy, or any other psychology rules. That feels like that would mean you don't auto break from fear.
So maybe the Warhammer Empire forum misled us, or we're misunderstanding.
Or maybe there's some FAQ sometime in 6th ed that said, except they still definitely do auto break, and I don't know. So
I don't know. Seems like that's what I expected.
Yeah, and then I also couldn't figure out, it says that they don't ignore all psychology. So does that mean that you could be like immune to psychology but still have hatred?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's
because they always had to have those weird rules.
Right, because hatred is good and immune to psychology is good, so they don't want you to lose out on it. Yeah, that's fair.
They'd always have to say, he's hatred, but they're still immune to psychology. Yeah, yeah, it's a weird thing.
Yeah, did you have anything else about that one?
No, I'm good on that one. Flyers can choose to charge enemy units or fly over them during pursuit moves. I like this. I like that you fly into the screen in the front, you wipe them out, And now in 6th, it's like, well, they're going to go over and hit that big brick behind it or whatever, and they're going to die. In this, I can be like, well, I'll fly over them. I like that. I mean, it's a buff to flyers, but it makes sense to me, and I think it's not necessarily overpowered. I don't know. It doesn't bother me. I don't know. Maybe I would feel differently if I play with it more, but on the surface, seems intuitive.
Yeah, as long as they can make it all the way over the enemy unit. I think if they land on top, they have to back up and count as charging. But if they have enough movement to get all the way over them, then yeah, being able to fly over is definitely a nice option.
The only thing I guess I could see where that gets weird is because typically the flyers are skirmish. So it's like, how do you like determine that? Do you just measure from the one guy and be like, oh yeah, he cleared it, and then the other two or other members just kind of get over? Or is it like that one guy, he didn't make it because he was... Although I guess they were in combat, so hopefully they're lined up. I don't know, whatever. I'm probably overthinking it.
We'll deal with it when we get there, when we someday play 7th. Maybe.
There you go.
The next one, characters that can fly can join units. However, characters on flying mounts cannot. I think it's cool that they clarified that flying characters can join units, but it's weird to me that... Or maybe I misread this. So it's saying
it's for
that
dragons and stuff like that.
Okay, I think I misread this. It's characters that can fly can join any unit, which they didn't previously used to be, but flying mount units can't join units. Okay, I think I was reading it as flying units, characters that can fly can join flying units. So I just misunderstood that.
Oh, okay.
This is nice. It's just more flexibility of what you can do with your characters. I think that's fine.
Yep. Units led by a character that causes fear or terror grants the immunities to them to the unit he is with, and vice versa. This only worked one way in 6th, we're pretty sure.
It did, and they explained it as
character.
If you end up in base contact with the character that causes fear, that model takes the fear test because they're fighting the scary guy, but the other people in the unit aren't fighting scary guys, so they don't have to do it.
Fascinating.
Yeah, which is really fiddly, but does kind of make sense. So I don't know. The only thing I could think of that this would be bad for is if there's some really cheap combo you could do where you could somehow get a cheap fear-causing character and put it in a really expensive unit that shouldn't otherwise have fear, or even like a really cheap unit that's really big but now causes fear, so that you get that auto breakout numbering thing or something like that. So I don't know if it is open to abuse just because I'm not as familiar with all the army books, but yeah, I don't know. It is a simplification thing, so probably fine.
It seems better. I'm not super bothered by it, so whatever. Yeah. Sure.
Next one is units must always use the battle standard bearer's reroll ability if the first test is failed. This feels like just a clarification for clarification's sake. It's hard to imagine when you wouldn't want to do that. Maybe there's a time where you do really want to flee and you think you would have a faster unit and be able to outrun them.
From this combat.
Yeah, but
I don't know.
Yeah, it seems like a weird clarification, but I guess maybe there's corner cases where you want to fail, but you always have to reroll.
You just reroll.
Yeah, consistency is nice.
You just do it. Magic resistance extends to units from characters and vice versa. Perfect. Love it. I kind of prefer it that way anyway. It's kind of weird that it wasn't kind of doing that always.
I mean, again, it
kind of a lot of bad magic items too. So I like it.
I think it's just one of those things where it feels like the item was meant to enshroud a single person with a magical energy field, but now it suddenly expands to a unit of 40 guys.
Sure.
So I can see why it didn't used to be that way in 6th edition, but I agree that for the sake of simplicity and streamlining, it's probably fine. And like you said, buff some magic items, that's probably okay. Next one is magic shields allow a parry bonus when combined with a normal hand weapon, but not with a magical weapon. So if you have a magic sword and a enchanted shield, then you're not getting the extra +1. But if you have a mundane hand weapon and a magic shield, you get that. So I think there are other magic shields in other army lists, but the main one that everybody has access to is the enchanted shield, which is a +2 armor save. And so it seems like in 6, the idea behind this is that was the shield you would take with a magic weapon so that you sort of get the parry bonus, even though you're not really. But now this just opens it up so that there's a little bit more flexibility with it being a little bit better than it would have been. But what this means is you can get the 1-up save Empire Captain on foot because you get the +2 from the shield, +1 for the parry bonus.
With an enchanted shield.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that could be fun.
Yeah, no, I think this is a positive change. I think magic shields are generally bad because parry's just good and it's cheap. So you can buy a real just plain shield for like 4 points on a lord or whatever.
Yeah.
And it gives you +2 armor in close combat, right? Or you could pay like 30 points, get less armor, and then like an effect that maybe matters. So for a lot of people, just doing the math, I could pay way less, get something consistent, or I could just pay way more. So this makes magic shields way more viable.
Yeah.
Big fan. Wish this was in 6th. Going from there. A unit can now shoot only against one enemy unit and not multiple enemy units in any case. No exceptions except when specifically noted in the army book. I don't know when that's specifically noted. I'd love to see it. But this has come up a couple times with some Brett archers a few times. And when it was brought up, I was like, nah, there's no way that's right. And then we like looked and it was like, oh yeah, you can split fire like if a part of the unit can't see the target so they could shoot at something else. It just seemed like needlessly fiddly.
Yeah, it was a very corner case where that would happen.
Right.
But yeah, I don't even remember the exact wording.
It came up once and I was like, oh wow, I had no idea. And now it's gone. So
yeah, I think this is just way simpler.
Fine.
It's just easier to say one unit shoots at one other unit all the time, and if not everybody can do it, well, too bad.
Yep.
Next one is defended obstacles have been toned down. Units attacking over an obstacle simply lose the charging bonus. In 6th edition, it was they would only hit on 6s when fighting over an obstacle, which is so harsh. We actually have house ruled this in our own games of 6th edition where we typically play that you are just -1 to hit when you're fighting over an obstacle.
That's still pretty negative.
It is. It's still pretty hard to beat people off of a obstacle that way. So I agree that this did need to be toned down. I think I do like our house rule better, just the -1 to hit. There's not a ton of bonuses to charging. Like obviously you get to strike first, but since if you're not striking first, it just goes back to initiative. And a lot of times that's not necessarily going to help the people that really needed the benefit of the obstacle anyways.
Right. The big thing is, I guess it really hurts charging cavalry with lances.
That's true. That's true.
Like the only obvious big thing.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of all I have about that.
I don't feel particularly strongly.
It's fine. I'm glad that it's toned down. Maybe wouldn't have been the exact way I would have done it, but it's fine.
Great weapons confer only a +1 strength bonus to mounted models. You can no longer use an additional hand weapon while mounted. This is very corner case. There's very few mounted. So does this nerf White Wolf cavalry?
I think it does. Because I think that's like their thing is that they were the strength 2 great weapons.
So that sucks for them, I guess. But I don't know. I don't have strong feelings on this. It's fine. I guess it nerfs.
I wonder if did they like change the rules for the White Wolves in their new army book that somehow still gives it to them?
If I remember, maybe it's because it's called like Cavalry Hammer or something specific. I can't remember. But in 7th, they don't have a specific like separate entry.
Oh, okay.
If I remember correctly.
It's just knights can take that as an item. I see.
Yeah, they kind of streamlined it a bit, if I recall correctly. So, I don't know. It's fine. A lot of these following rules, I'm kind of like, cool.
Whatever. Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know how many models have the additional hand weapon while mounted, but I guess it kind of makes sense that you can't ride a horse, but people shoot bows off of horses, so I don't know, maybe you should be able to use 2 hand weapons.
Yeah.
It's probably fine.
Yep.
The next one is pistols simply count as hand weapons in close combat. If a model carries 2 or more pistols, it just has the 2x multiple shots rule. It's a nice
pistoliers, right? Like there's like nothing else in the game.
Well, like an Empire captain can have a pistol.
Okay.
So in 6th edition, if you're not familiar, if you have a pistol the first round of close combat, it still counts as a pistol and is strength 4 armor piercing, so -2 to armor. I really like that. It is obviously more clunky. There's another level of granularity being added when you do that, but it is some nice flavor that makes it feel really cool. It makes it feel more worthwhile to take the pistol instead of just an extra hand weapon. So I mourn the loss of that, but I don't know if again, I'm not familiar with the Empire Army book in 7th, so I don't know if they tweaked pistoliers at all to make that still feel really good when they first charge in or whatever. But in 6th edition, they could fire both their pistols. So you're getting 2 strength 4 armor-piercing shots in the first round of combat. And that's way better than just getting an extra attack that this would be giving you. So unless they updated the pistoliers in the army book to still somehow get some other benefit, I think this really nerfs pistoliers. And I think that might be the case because I think the Outriders got introduced in 7th edition.
They did.
And that, I think, became like the go-to thing that you would take at that point. So I think it kind of sucks, but I get it from a streamlining perspective that was maybe sort of a fiddly thing because you only get to do it in the first round of combat, sort of a thing. But what do you think?
I like a little more crunch than the average bear, so I lament this loss as well. I don't think the pistoliers were overflowing with special rules that they needed to lose this. So they're like the main unit that is hit by this. Yeah. So it seems a bit unnecessary. Regeneration is now a simple save working exactly like a ward save, except that it can be taken after ward saves and is canceled by flaming attacks. Thank goodness. This is how it should have been. I don't like this weird, like they die and then they get back up.
Yeah, that was just complicated and confusing.
It's just hard to track. It's a pain in the butt. This is how it should work. This is... Just make it a weird special save that is, if you're flaming, you don't get it. Boom. Makes flaming worth it.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Sweet. Love it.
Yep. Totally agree. Just simpler, easier. Makes sense. The next one is that buildings got a complete overhaul. There weren't really rules for utilizing buildings in 6th edition, which on the one hand kind of makes sense because your big blocks of regimented infantry, you're not really going in buildings, but it does mean a bunch of terrain potentially is now completely useless. So this introduces complete rules for moving units into buildings, how they operate as a unit. It essentially means like the walls of the building become the edges of the unit for measuring ranges and fighting and things like that. It's even better than defending an obstacle for getting shot at and fighting and things like that. And yeah, there's just a whole bunch of additional things. So I like this. This, I think, like we talked about in the last episode, is a new way to play. It kind of is an add-on that now if you want to have buildings that aren't just impassable terrain, here's a whole set of rules that let you do that in a pretty robust way. And so I think that's just cool. You don't have to use it. It doesn't have to fundamentally change how you play the game, but it could add a bunch of cool, interesting extra elements and make your terrain a little bit more interactive. So overall, I like that. Along with this, though, I think they also added a whole section on like special terrain right after that, where you can have like a historical landmark and like a graveyard or a crypt or something like that. I can't remember the names they used for all of those. But each of those have then special rules. Like if your unit controls it, so I don't remember, I think it was like the unit strength thing within 6 inches or something like that, then you get some sort of a benefit, like a boost to your leadership or something like that. Love that. That's super cool. I like, again, it's a sort of modular thing where you can add it on if you want to say that this is a special thing that goes in the center of the table and now we're fighting over it and it has an actual impact on the battle. Super cool. Love that. In this book, it even says these are really powerful, so maybe only have one.
Right.
But I think this was the beginning of Games Workshop starting to produce plastic terrain kits that were like, this is the Garden of Moor. So when you put it on your table, it does cool things so that you feel like you have to buy it. And this is the spooky wood. So when you buy it, it's definitely the spooky wood. And so even though at the beginning when this book first came out, that wasn't really how it was being implemented. Yeah. Again, I think that's just like the seed was planted and things were starting to head in that direction where eventually everything was just this crazy terrain. And for me, that's not what I'm here for. I want my battlefield to be mostly mundane. I want woods to be woods, and I want graveyards to just be graveyards. I don't need them to be all special fancy. But yeah, I do want to just caveat that all with, I know that's not exactly what happened in this book specifically, but it just was a warning flag, I think, of what was to come. But I like its implementation here. Yep. I love that it adds some extra cool options that are kind of built into the system. It's not presented
as something you have to do.
Yeah, and I would still do it. And with their recommendation of one thing per game, cool, let's just throw that in there. Not? It adds some interest. It gives you something to fight over, makes part of the battlefield work a little bit differently than it would have otherwise.
I feel the same way about the special features. Buildings, I'm a little, I don't know. I feel like I think you noted they look pretty powerful. I would like to try them first, but it looks like it's pretty hard to get somebody out of a building.
Yeah.
If you want to, and they have pretty good fighters in there. Good luck.
Yeah. I do like there's a rule, I think if a template weapon overlaps it at all, they take like D6 hits inside the building. So there's a little bit of a way of like, okay, well, we can bombard their building and that'll be more effective than normal at least.
So maybe something to do when you know that there's going to be buildings involved and you and your opponent can have like cooperatively list builds. So maybe include some of those template weapons or whatever if you think somebody's going to have easy access. But as a sort of just, hey, we're throwing some buildings in there. I don't know. Yeah,
and we often have like a peasant house or something, and if all of a sudden that becomes this like heavily defensible piece of terrain, it's like, well, maybe we don't want to throw that on every board.
It's kind of fun in some ways, but I don't know. I think give it a shot.
If you're doing sort of like randomized terrain placement, it often, a building doesn't just happen to be in the best spot anyways to be defended, and if there's more to the scenario and winning than just killing the other player, then I think buildings become less good because you can't just bunker down in them if you need to be moving around and dealing with other objectives. But yeah, again, it's modular, so you can kind of add it in if you like it here and there. Try it out. You got the next one.
Okay. Half VPs are now scored for units reduced to half strength or less, and not below half strength. The same is true of characters and monsters, etc. So now it's like less than or equal to, not just less than. So this is going to come up pretty seldomly, I would think. Although maybe not. I guess there's a lot of units that are like 20 guys, and if 10 of them died, although then you have full command, so...
But it's a big deal with characters if it's like 4 wounds.
Sure.
That's a whole extra wound out of 4 wounds is pretty big.
That's true. It probably comes up more than I think it does. So it seems more streamlined and makes sense. And I honestly might have been doing that already anyway.
Yeah, it's like one of those things that's easy to miss when you're quickly calculating VPs at the end.
So.
Yeah, I think it's fine. I think it just errs on the side of you're more likely now to get the partial points, which I like because it feels nice that like every step closer I get to that break point, I'm more likely to get something for all the work that I put in.
Sure.
The next one is units with unit strength of less than 5 cannot capture table quarters, nor can they deny them. I think this makes total sense. I think we often forget to score table quarters when we're doing victory points.
I always forget to score table quarters.
So I don't know that our group has really had any issues with people like running a tiny unit over to a table quarter on the last turn to claim it and get some victory points.
Yeah.
But this would maybe be preventing that from happening.
I think this is why we don't play with table quarters, is because of that idea of like, then the end of the game turns into
everyone's
not
just
fighting,
running away,
but everybody's like, I gotta go secure the table quarter with my 4 archers. It's like, oh. But yeah, no, I guess this seems like a direct improvement.
Yeah, there's nothing bad about it, and I don't know, it's just fine. Yeah.
Yep. Champion, banners, musicians, etc., full command, and characters all equally have to be in the first rank. Players are free to decide who goes at the back if there's no space. I'm not sure if wasn't that already the case?
I think it prioritized characters in 6th edition. So and now it's saying it's equal, so you can always choose which of those goes. But yeah, it seems pretty inconsequential.
I'm glad that they clarified, I guess. Yeah. But I'm not super, especially now that you have to be 5 wide to get a rank bonus. You're going to have some weird units with full command and multiple characters before this comes into effect. Yeah. So, cool, I guess.
And then finally, the player winning the roll-off at the beginning of the game gets to choose the table side, but then also has to start deploying first, which balances out the importance of that initial roll. Something that we've always thought is kind of funny is how many times you have to roll at the beginning of a game, because you roll to pick table side, then you roll to see who deploys first, then you roll to see who gets first turn. And so this combines 2 rolls. I think that's good. It makes sense, and I think the fact that it balances that choice out a little bit is nice instead of leaving it completely up to chance.
I echo everything you say. And that was the last one. So with that, I'm going to just kind of go to my conclusion, and then we can go to yours and kind of spitball from there. So after revisiting this rule book after suggestion of a viewer, I'm kind of brought back to, we talked a little bit about this idea of it's pretty popular to play this edition, this core rule book, but with 6th ed army books. So like 7th ed at release, so to speak. Although maybe that's not even a good example because I think the Empire and Orc books might have been right there at release or darn near. But this edition has a really bad reputation, I think mostly because of the army books. I would say about 80%, pulling that number out of my bottom, but the vast majority of these rule changes I would be in support of. And you could apply to 8th edition and I would be like, yeah, no, that's just
apply
better.
to 8th edition or
sorry,
6th?
6th edition, sorry. And I would say they're a strict upgrade. Don't know. And now I feel myself tempted to try it. It's those weird 20% that I'm like either who cares, or oh, I don't like that.
Yeah.
That kind of hold me back. That, and then combined with, if I'm playing 7th Ed, do I want to then just play with 7th Ed books?
And
Now
just
that you,
see how
just
it goes?
to see,
Yeah.
and then I wonder, like, as somebody who owns a lot of the 7th Ed books, there's a lot of cool stuff in there, and they've made a lot of, at least some of them, I think, made a lot of really cool positive changes to things that I kind of complained about in certain 6th Ed books, where I'm like, hey, they did the things that, like, looks like a lot of elite infantry got better, or addressed at least somewhat. Now, it's true that it looks like a lot of heavy cav either got introduced, things like Blood Knights didn't exist in 6th, now they're in 7th, and man, oh man, they look pretty crazy. They look like Grail Knights, kind of, and how killy they are.
Yeah.
And then, you know, Chaos Warriors went up, got way better. A lot. The High Elf, what are they called? Phoenix Guard. Now they've just got 4-up ward saves and always strikes first and all this stuff. And that's all really cool and exciting. And I'm wondering if it's a situation where it's just everything's overpowered, so nothing is.
Right.
But then I worry too, because it looks like, to me, looking in from the outside, those early books, Empire and Orcs specifically, look like you could play them in 6th and it would be just fine.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. The Dwarf 6.5
Right.
was like essentially, people say, designed for 7th kind of a thing. But that definitely works totally fine with 6th edition.
Right.
Really doesn't feel overpowered. They didn't really introduce much in there that feels like it's changing anything too crazy.
Right. But all that to say, I'd be curious to play this both with 6th Ed Army books. I feel like certain things like the Swarm change would have really big changes to how you want to build your armies. But then I'd also like to try it someday with the No-No books. Maybe somebody plays Chaos Demons. I think that's the one that's like thrown into the woods, Dark Elves, Vampire Counts. Those 3 are the big 3 I see thrown around a lot. Every so often I'll see Lizardmen referenced as really broken too. But, like, that's half of the army. I mean, like, that's a ton of the armies already. So, I don't know. I'm just wondering. And then I think about, like, what I've read in, like, High Elves. That whole army has always strikes first. You know? But I'd be curious to play this edition more and see if it really deserves the reputation that it seems to have.
Yeah.
Both with and without 6th Ed Army books. There's a lot to like here. I think it's a really streamlined and more consistent rulebook. 6th Ed, I think, was the pioneer.
Right, where they tried to start that, but there was still a lot of leftovers from earlier times where things were a little bit more chaotic.
This was okay, we've got a good base. People like what we have. Let's tweak it. Let's get it better. And then they just fumbled the execution on the army books, potentially, and then that's just soured people on it for forever.
And then it seems like they then took 8th and tried to solve the problem of the army book power creep by just changing everything in the core of significantly. And then just this
8th
sort of
is
like
a whole different animal. I don't even think we could do this type of a cast. It would be 6 hours because you'd have
so many differences.
There's so many intrinsic differences. You could, but 7th and 6th, I feel like if you taught somebody 6th edition, you could teach them, you could go through that list that we just went through, you could send it to them, they could read it in 5 minutes and be like, oh, okay.
Yeah, and then be really confused for the first few games because it's mostly subtle variations.
Right,
but
and
then
they'd
eventually
be like,
totally
I
fine.
thought that way was that way already. And it's like, it kind of was, but not.
But that's why, like we mentioned in our last episode about edition changes in general, that would be where it'd be great to just bring this list to the first few games and have that as sort of a reference just to double check on those things. And if you're going through an edition change with a game, I think, this type of list is super helpful. So maybe take it upon yourself to give back to the community. And if you want to go through and make a list like this for some other game, it's just going to help people. So I would generally agree with you just in terms of my overall thoughts on this, Grant. I think that it's probably fine. I think it would be great to play it with the 6th ed books. I think it'd probably be fine to play with the 7th ed books. I think this is an example of an edition change that was just fine. And if you had a good group that was playing, you probably continued playing and still had fun with it.
I bet you there's people who played with demons in a group casually and everybody was like, yeah, that was fine.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe everybody like looked at the book and was like, and they just started vomiting. I don't know. But
yeah, I think when I start thinking about it, it's like, okay, well, yeah, let's do 7th edition with 6th ed books, but let's just drop the swarms rule. But then now I'm just starting to like make a bespoke version that's just like, I'm just going to do a conglomeration of all the different things. And now it's just confusing and chaotic. And I think that also isn't particularly helpful. So with any game system, it's rare that you're going to find something that's perfect, that you like every single thing about it. And so I think there's a tendency, and this happens in the Facebook group sometimes, where somebody will come in and be like, all right, I'm making the like go-to house rule compendium for 6th edition that everybody will agree on because it's definitely the best. And my group has figured this out and we're like going to do it. And everybody's always like rolling their eyes and being like, this is ridiculous. And I think that's totally fair because maybe if you've got
everybody's
a really
got different preferences.
Yeah. And if you've got a tight knit group that is all on the same page, absolutely do your house rule thing. But I think by and large, it's just going to be easier to take something as it's written because you can just go back to the rule book, refer to the rules, figure out how it's working, and just go from there.
I think what's been interesting about this exercise for me too, I'm glad you brought that up, is that I think I'm starting to like think that way. Like, do I want to play 6th edition or do I want to play 7th? I want to play like this weird homebrew mishmash of all these different things because I like a lot of different spices across all these different beautiful spice vendors, but they're like arbitrarily like, oh, you can't take my spice from my table and mix it with their spice from their table. And I'm like, I'll just buy your spices and go do it at home.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. That's a weird metaphor I just used, but
it's apt.
I just feel like that's what I'm leaning for more and more over time. It's like we have that control. So
we totally could do it. I think it's just it's hard to.
Why do we let ourselves feel so limited? It's because it's so much work.
It is, and I think it's also hard to bring new people into that
too.
Because you can just say, yeah, just buy the rule book on thrift books for $20 and then read it, and then that's what we're doing. But then if you're like, buy that rule book, but also buy this rule book, but then also read this Google Doc that I put together.
Read our 45-page Google Doc summarizing all the changes, and then which army are you playing? Let me send you the other Google Doc with all the changes to that.
So I think that's the thing that keeps me off of it. I think eventually, if you're not adding new people to the group and everybody's played a bunch, and you kind of all are at that point where you've read both rule books and you all have an understanding of the differences, then you can start patchworking things. But otherwise, I think there are people who have done things like Warhammer Renaissance is sort of like the 4th and 5th edition version of that, where they took everything that they liked and actually made a new rule book that's pretty well maintained by the guy who did it and the community that they've built around it. So if that's available, that's great. If you want to be the person that does that for 6th and 7th and makes the 6th, 7th combo book called Middle Hammer Renaissance or something, like, go for it. But yeah, I don't know. I think at this point, I'd rather just try a new game rather than spend all my time putting together the ultimate 6.5 edition rulebook compendium.
I respect it. Okay. Any other final thoughts? No, I think let's play 7th sometime, but those are the changes. Those are the differences. If you're playing 7th edition, let us know in the comments. If you do it with whichever army books, let us know. If you've got all your homebrew mega conglomeration version of it, let us know. Send it to us so we don't have to make it.
Amen to that. But I think that's all we have for this episode.
Yep. This has been Refused Flank. I'm Grant.
And I'm Cam.
Have a good rest of your day. Bye.